The first thing Jack felt when he woke up was pain. Not the sharp, slicing kind that made him scream out, no, this was more subtle. It was the kind of dull throb that made him aware of his body without it truly demanding attention. He was lying on his back in a sterile room, a white light blaring overhead. For a second, he thought he was dead. Heaven didn't feel so bad, he mused, but the strange thing was that he wasn't sure if this was heaven or some kind of high-tech hospital. He had seen a lot of blood on the battlefield, but there was no way he was supposed to feel this good after getting shot in the chest. His eyes fluttered open, blinking against the brightness. He didn't feel any tubes down his throat or wires sticking into his skin. In fact, he felt pretty damn good considering the last time he'd checked. A bullet had torn right through his rib cage. A warm tingling sensation ran over his body, like something inside was repairing the damage. Odd. Very odd. You're awake, a voice said. He turned his head toward the sound. A man in a white lab coat stood there, his expression unreadable, but not particularly welcoming. Behind him, a woman in a surgical mask hovered near a bank of blinking machines. Jack tried to sit up, but something inside his chest pulled tight, like invisible strings holding him down. He groaned in annoyance, but the pain was more an inconvenience than a real barrier. His body felt lighter, almost as though it had been remade from scratch. He winced, the doctor sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. You've been through a lot, Jack. We've used cutting-edge nanotech to help you heal. It's the only reason you're alive. Nanotech, huh? Jack's voice was raspy, but it carried the usual sarcasm. Let me guess. I'm part cyborg now? Is that why I feel like I'm lying in a sci-fi movie? The doctor gave him a tight smile, his tone clinical, yet strangely comforting. Not quite a cyborg. You're different now. The nanobots we've injected are repairing your tissues on a microscopic level, rebuilding everything. Your internal organs, your bones, your muscles, they're regenerating, faster than any traditional treatment could. Jack stared at his hands. They looked the same. The same calloused skin, same knuckles that had been smashed in countless brawls, same fingerprints. But there was something strange. Something out of place. He felt like he was looking at someone else's hands. The feeling was brief, but disorienting. Yeah, okay, Doc, he muttered. So I'm like a walking science project. What happens next? We need to monitor your progress, the doctor replied. But we're hopeful that the nanobots will fully restore you in a matter of weeks. Your recovery is already ahead of schedule. Jack wanted to ask about his injuries, about the bullet hole and the blood and the firefight that had led to his near death. But he couldn't remember the details. Nothing seemed clear. All he had was a vague sense of chaos, of violence, of blood. He furrowed his brow, trying to piece it together. Something was wrong. He couldn't remember his last mission, his last fight, or even what he'd been doing before the bullet had sent him into unconsciousness. All he knew was that he'd been hurt, badly, right, yeah. Got it. He cleared his throat. So what happens if these little bots don't finish their work? I'm not looking to be a science experiment for too long, Doc. The doctor smiled thinly. You don't need to worry about that. The nanobots are programmed to heal your body to its optimal state. They're self-regulating and will adapt to any issues that arise. Self-regulating. Jack wasn't sure if he trusted that. He shifted uncomfortably, the feeling in his chest still not quite right, but he shrugged it off. For the next few days, Jack allowed himself to drift in and out of sleep, his mind clouded with fragmented memories. He tried not to dwell on it. After all, it wasn't uncommon for someone to feel off after taking a bullet to the chest. But the longer he stayed in that sterile room, the more those vague feelings of unease grew. There was a creeping sense that he didn't belong in his own body, like he was being invaded from the inside. At one point, he woke up to find a woman sitting by his bedside, a clipboard in her lap. She had a friendly face, but Jack couldn't place her at first. Her features were familiar but in a way that unsettled him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice groggy. She smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Dr. Sheila. We've been monitoring you closely, Jack. How are you feeling today?" Jack frowned. "Like I'm trying to figure out who the hell you are. No offense, but I don't think I remember ever seeing you before." Dr. Sheila's smile faltered, and she glanced at the clipboard. "That's normal. You're still recovering, Jack. The nanobots, they've been helping your body heal, but there's something more to it. You've been through a lot. Physically and mentally." Jack wasn't entirely convinced. "And how much of that mental thing involves me forgetting people?" She hesitated, but then her expression softened. "It's not that you've forgotten. It's that your memories are fragmented. The nanobots are so efficient at healing the body that sometimes they unintentionally affect the mind, too. It's common with this type of procedure. You may experience lapses in memory, confusion. It should pass as the nanobots stabilize." Jack grunted, trying to focus. She wasn't saying anything concrete. He wasn't even sure what was wrong with his memory. He had no idea why the details were so hazy, why certain faces and places felt like they belonged to someone else. "So when can I get out of here?" he asked, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of unease. Doctor Sheila adjusted her glasses. "We'll need to continue monitoring your progress for the next few weeks. It'll be a few more days before we can clear you for active duty again." Jack sat up a little, ignoring the tug in his chest. "Active duty? That sounds familiar. But I'm not sure I'm the same guy who's up for the job right now." She gave him a reassuring smile, but something in her eyes didn't quite match her words. "You're exactly who you were before, Jack. Don't worry." It wasn't long before Jack realized that something bigger was going on than just some memory fog. Every day, his body seemed to improve, but his mind? His mind felt like it was spiraling. He started hearing things. Whispers. Not out loud, but inside his head, echoing faintly like distant voices. They were soft at first, barely audible, but soon they grew louder. At first, Jack thought it was just the side effect of his recovery. Maybe his brain was overcompensating as it tried to heal itself. But as the days passed, the whispers started making sense. "Move now," one voice instructed. "Focus on the mission," another said. His heart rate spiked, and he could feel a chill run down his spine. Was this just a hallucination? The effects of the nanobots messing with his brain chemistry? Or was something more sinister at play? He clenched his fists, trying to push the voices away. He didn't need this. Not now. His head throbbed, his vision blurring. "Who the hell is talking to me?" he muttered under his breath, but the voices only grew more insistent. "You are in danger," they warned. Jack jumped out of the bed, ignoring the flash of pain in his chest. His legs wobbled beneath him, but he managed to stagger to the door, his mind racing. He needed to get out. Needed to find some answers. He reached for the door handle, but before he could twist it, a voice came through his earpiece, soft but clear. "Jack, you need to stay calm. We've been monitoring you. The nanobots are doing their job. Don't fight it. You were chosen for this." The voice wasn't just in his head anymore. It was coming from an outside source. Jack froze, his hand still on the door handle. His pulse quickened as everything inside him screamed to get out. But something, or someone, was keeping him there. Keeping him controlled. Jack's breath quickened. His thoughts spun. Who am I? Who have I become? The voice in Jack's earpiece crackled again, the same calm, almost soothing tone. "Jack, please remain where you are. You're not in control of your actions right now. We can help you." He felt a sudden wave of nausea hit him like a physical punch, his stomach lurching. His mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to hold on to something real. But everything was slipping away, like sand through his fingers. The walls of the room seemed to pulse, bending and shifting, as though the very space around him was starting to disintegrate. The earpiece buzzed louder, the voice repeating its commands, urging him to stay still, to trust them, but the words only pushed him further into panic. Stay calm, the voice insisted again. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rip the damn earpiece out, but his hands trembled, unsure of what was real anymore. He staggered backward, his heart hammering in his chest. Each beat felt too strong, too fast, almost like it wasn't his own. He felt as though something was taking root inside him, deep within the layers of his mind, a growing presence, a thing that wasn't him. I am Jack, he told himself. I am still Jack. I have to be. But the certainty wavered. There was a fracture inside his mind, a split between who he thought he was and the relentless whispers that kept flooding his consciousness. A low hum started to vibrate in the back of his skull, like 1,000 tiny gears turning in unison, and then another voice echoed through his thoughts, louder than before, "You are not Jack." The words sent a cold shiver down his spine. He reached up to clutch his head, the sudden wave of dizziness nearly knocking him to his knees. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he couldn't tell whether he was still in the sterile hospital room or standing in the middle of an empty street at night. The images flickered like a broken TV, warping and distorting. One moment he was on the battlefield, a rifle in his hands, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The next, he was walking into a dark room, a woman's silhouette standing before him. A woman whose face he couldn't quite remember, but who seemed far too familiar. "Who are you?" Jack whispered to the shadow in his mind, but she didn't respond. Instead, the voice in his earpiece spoke again. "You are part of the greater plan, Jack. The mission you've been assigned to is beyond your understanding. We are here to guide you." "Guide me?" Jack spat, the words tasting like metal on his tongue. "I don't need your guidance. I just need to get the hell out of here." His body trembled as the rush of adrenaline coursed through his veins. He ripped the earpiece out, tossing it onto the floor. The buzzing in his mind didn't stop. It only grew louder. His breath quickened, his chest tightening as if the very air was turning to cement. What the hell is happening to me? He backed into the wall, his head spinning with the disjointed memories that didn't make sense. Was he really Jack? Or had that name been stripped away, replaced by something darker? He thought of the faces that had haunted him, Dr. Sheila, the doctors, the woman in his fragmented memories, and none of them felt like they belonged. They were pieces of a puzzle, scattered and disconnected. Who am I? He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping the visions would stop, the voices would fade. But they didn't. Instead, they became more insistent. More precise. The whispers that had been a low murmur before now felt like commands, demands. "Jack," the voice whispered again, now dripping with authority. "You are our creation. We've shaped you. You belong to us." Jack's stomach twisted. He opened his eyes and saw the blurry figure of Dr. Sheila standing in the doorway, her face a mask of calm that barely concealed the tension beneath it. She looked at him with pity, or was it concern? But there was something else in her eyes, something Jack couldn't place. "Jack," she said softly, as though coaxing a skittish animal. "Please, listen to me. This is for your own good. The nanobots, they've linked to your neural patterns. They've altered your memories. Your thoughts. Your very identity." He blinked, trying to focus on her, but her words made no sense. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You've been chosen," she repeated, her voice laced with an eerie calm. "The nanobots aren't just healing you, Jack. They've reshaped your mind, your past, your purpose. Everything you've known, it's all been tailored. You don't remember it, but you were selected." The room around him began to tilt again. He couldn't make out the shapes of the walls anymore. The vision of Dr. Sheila warped into something grotesque, her features distorting, as if someone was pulling at the threads of her face. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but his body wouldn't obey. It was like he was being trapped in his own skin, his limbs refusing to move the way he told them to. "No," he muttered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "You're lying. This isn't real. I'm not some project. I'm Jack. I've always been Jack." Her eyes softened, but the pity in them made his stomach churn. "I'm afraid it's true. Your memories have been overwritten, Jack. You've been given a new identity, a new mission. You've been conditioned to forget everything that came before." He staggered backward, his breath coming in short bursts. "No. No, you're wrong. I'm not some experiment. I was a soldier. I had a life. I had a past." Dr. Sheila stepped forward, her voice a gentle plea. "You don't understand yet. The nanobots are rewriting your memories to align with the new version of you. You're part of a greater project. A new kind of soldier. A soldier who will follow orders without question. You're not the man you think you are." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered again, pressing his hands against his temples, trying to hold on to something, anything. But the weight of her words crushed him. The whispers in his mind only grew louder, drowning out her voice. "Who am I?" he demanded, his voice hoarse, desperate. "Who the hell am I?" "Jack," Dr. Sheila said gently. "You're still Jack. But you're also more than that now. You're a new version of yourself, engineered for a purpose. You are the future, Jack. You were chosen for this." The truth of it hit him like a brick wall. His life, everything he had been, was a lie. A construct. The memories that had felt so real were nothing more than an illusion, fabricated by the very machines inside him. The life he'd thought he knew, the man he'd believed himself to be, had been stripped away. The realization was suffocating. His heart raced in his chest, but it felt too slow. Too heavy. He had been molded into this. Chosen. Conditioned. "Why?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Why do this to me?" Dr. Sheila hesitated, her gaze flickering with something he couldn't quite interpret. The world needs soldiers who can think beyond personal attachment. Soldiers who are loyal, obedient. Without hesitation. You were created for a mission, Jack. A mission that will change everything. "I don't care about your mission," Jack spat, his words shaky but defiant. "I care about who I am. I care about what's real." Dr. Sheila stepped closer, her eyes scanning him like a scientist studying a specimen. "What's real, Jack? What's real is that you're not who you think you are. But you can still choose. You can choose to embrace who you've become. Or you can fight it. But know this, the nanobots are inside you. They've integrated with your brain. If you fight them, you'll only hurt yourself. You can't undo what's been done." Jack could feel the weight of the truth settling on his chest, suffocating him. His mind screamed for answers, for clarity, for the one thing he needed to understand: who am I? But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces slipped away. The more the whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent, like voices calling him back to a place he didn't want to go. The mission. The purpose. The new Jack, but was that who he wanted to be? The questions gnawed at him, tearing at the edges of his sanity. He could feel the nanobots moving within him, shifting, rewriting, recalibrating his thoughts, his identity. And in the back of his mind, a single thought echoed through the storm: if I'm not Jack, then who am I? Jack's mind was spinning. The walls of the sterile room seemed to pulse around him, their edges stretching and warping in the periphery. He could hear the soft hum of the nanobots in his head, like 1,000 tiny engines turning in unison, tirelessly working beneath his skin. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the weight of Dr. Sheila's words. He wasn't who he thought he was. And that truth, that stark, painful truth, clawed at him with every breath he took. "You're wrong," he whispered, his voice hoarse, more to himself than to her. "I don't want this. I don't want to be a weapon." But Dr. Sheila only watched him, her expression unchanging, cold. She took a step closer, the clicking of her shoes on the floor reverberating in his chest. "You don't have to want it, Jack. It's who you are now. You were chosen for this. And you'll fulfill your purpose." His heart thundered, a storm of conflicting emotions swirling inside him. He didn't want this. Didn't want to be a puppet controlled by invisible strings. His body, his mind, they weren't his anymore. They belonged to something else, something that was rewriting his very essence. "I'm not your tool," Jack spat, backing away, his legs unsteady beneath him. He reached for the door, but his hand hovered there, frozen. "No. Don't do this. Get out. Run." But his body wouldn't listen. Instead, he found himself sinking to the floor, clutching his head in his hands, as if trying to hold himself together. "What have you done to me?" he groaned. "Why can't I just remember who I am?" The whispers didn't stop. They were louder now, pushing him forward, urging him to follow their commands. Every thought he had was drowned by their insistent calls. The mission. The purpose. "You are the future. You belong to us." "Jack," Dr. Sheila's voice was almost tender now, a strange pity in her tone. "The nanobots are taking care of you. They're integrating your mind, your body, your memories into one cohesive whole. You don't need to fight it. You'll find clarity soon. You'll remember your mission, what you were made to do. All of it will make sense." "Clarity?" Jack's voice cracked. "All I see is chaos. All I feel is emptiness. You've taken everything from me." Her gaze softened, but there was no apology in her eyes. No remorse. "You haven't lost anything, Jack. You've gained everything. Power. Control. A new sense of purpose." He stood, his legs shaky, and locked eyes with her, feeling the rage begin to simmer beneath his skin. "You don't get it. You think I'm just some soldier? Some machine you can turn on and off at will?" She sighed, but it wasn't an angry sigh. It was a sigh of a woman speaking to a child who simply didn't understand. "You're not a machine, Jack. You're better than that. You're human. Enhanced. A soldier who will change the world." "Enhanced?" His voice was thick with disbelief. "I don't feel human. I feel broken. I feel like I've lost everything." "Because you're still fighting it," she said, taking another step toward him. "You're resisting the truth, Jack. It's hard, I know. But you'll see. Soon, everything will click into place." He shook his head, backing away from her. The walls seemed to close in around him, the air growing thicker with every breath. He needed to escape. Get out. Run. Get away from her. "I'm not your damn project," Jack muttered, almost to himself. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not this." Dr. Sheila's gaze hardened for the first time, the calm veneer of her expression cracking. "You can't outrun this, Jack. There's no escaping who you've become. You were chosen for a reason." Jack stumbled toward the door, his hands trembling, heart racing. "I'll figure it out. I'll get the truth. I'll find out who I really am." "Jack," but he didn't wait for her to finish. He wrenched open the door, stepping out into the hall, the sterile white floors stretching out in both directions. He didn't know where he was going. Didn't know if he could trust anything anymore. The facility around him felt like a maze, its quiet halls offering no solace, only the deafening hum of the nanobots in his head. But he couldn't stay there. He had to escape. He moved faster, his legs moving before his brain could fully process it. His breathing was erratic, but he kept pushing himself forward. Get out. Get away. Find out the truth. His footsteps echoed against the walls as he ran down the corridor. A door loomed ahead, and he threw himself toward it, slamming into it with his shoulder. It burst open, and he found himself in a dimly lit control room. A row of monitors lined the far wall, each one flashing with data he couldn't understand. But he didn't care about the data. He cared about the monitors, the screens, the voices he could hear in the background, people, watching him, tracking him. You're not supposed to be here, Jack. The voice came from behind him, and he spun around. A man in a lab coat stood at the entrance, his face obscured by the shadow of the doorway. The man's expression was unreadable, his stance rigid, as if he was already prepared for Jack's arrival. Who the hell are you? Jack demanded, his voice a growl. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze flicking to the monitors, then back to Jack. You don't need to know who I am. You need to understand what you've become. Jack's pulse quickened, and his mind raced. I don't give a damn what I've become. I want to know who did this to me. The man sighed, his gaze flickering to the monitors once more. It's not about who did this, Jack. It's about what you are now. What you were made for. Jack's thoughts raced, his mind pushing through the haze the nanobots had created. Made for? Made for what? What am I? Jack whispered, his voice breaking. The man's expression remained cold. You're the weapon that will lead the world into a new era. You were chosen for this mission. Your memories, your past, they were erased because they no longer matter. No, Jack said, his voice rising in anger. I don't believe you. I'm not just a weapon. I'm not a tool. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't kind. You're not in control anymore, Jack. You can fight it all you want, but the nanobots are already embedded in you. They've altered your mind, your memories. They've made you something greater than you were. And they will continue to guide you. You don't have a choice. The words hit Jack like a wave crashing over him. He felt like his mind was being torn apart, pieces of his past ripping away, fragments of himself slipping through his fingers. The man's words echoed in his head, each one sinking deeper into the cracks that were beginning to form in his consciousness. He was falling apart, but amidst the chaos, amidst the confusion, one thought remained clear. He wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let them control him. Jack took a step back, his chest tight, but he didn't falter. He turned toward the door, his hand already on the handle, and without a second thought, he broke into a run. The man's voice echoed behind him, but he didn't stop. No more whispers. No more voices in my head. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, the sterile walls blurring as he sprinted down them, his mind desperate for a way out. He could feel the nanobots in his bloodstream, the tugging sensation pulling at his thoughts, at his memories, at his identity. But this time, Jack pushed back. He fought the sensation, each step a rebellion against the thing inside him that wanted to rewrite who he was. The door to the outside world loomed ahead. He could almost taste freedom, and just as his hand reached for the door, a voice echoed one last time through his mind, Jack. You can't run from yourself. He froze, the voice was no longer distant. It was inside him. It was him. The nanobots, the mission, the future they'd shaped for him, it was all one seamless whole now. The man he had been, the soldier he had once been, was lost to the machine that had made him, but maybe that wasn't all bad. Maybe, just maybe, this new Jack could be something more than they had intended. He wasn't sure who he was anymore, but one thing was clear, he was going to find out. He would fight for the truth, for whatever that truth was. He stepped through the door and into the unknown.